effective. Then what they wanted to know is how the data might look different if you look at different demographic groups. They looked at different ethnicities, they looked at different ages, and they looked at different genders. And no matter how they looked at the data, if they were only looking at one particular demographic group, it was always at least 93% effective. In some cases, it was greater than 95% effective. In some cases, less than 95% effective. But no matter how they looked at the data, no matter which subgroup they were looking at, it was always at least 93% effective, always. So this is really powerful. On average, it was 95% effective at preventing future incidents of COVID cases. Further, it was 100% effective at preventing death due to COVID infection, which is something that is also very powerful. So this vaccine, it's safe and it's effective. Now we're going to go through a couple of common COVID-19 vaccine myths. The first is that it was developed too quickly, and so it can't be safe or effective. But the reality is that there are lots of reasons why scientists were able to develop the vaccine so quickly and they didn't reduce its safety or effectiveness. The first is that the scientists were not starting from scratch. Even though the novel coronavirus is new, scientists have been studying the family of coronaviruses for literal decades. There was a scare back in 2001 in the media, and it was because of the severe acute respiratory syndrome, or SARS for short. It got a lot of attention, and SARS is caused by a coronavirus, similar to this coronavirus. Further, a couple of years later, MERS, Middle Eastern Respiratory Syndrome, it came to light in the media. It is also caused by a coronavirus. So while we were studying the family of coronaviruses before 2001, once 2001 came around, we really started paying more attention to coronaviruses and we started funding more research. So because we were studying the family of coronaviruses for decades, we had a lot of the foundational understanding of how these viruses work, and we were able to get a head start on the research that needed to be done before we made the vaccine. Next is coronavirus has affected every single continent on the planet, which meant that the entire world came together and we received unprecedented worldwide collaboration. Now, with collaboration, worldwide collaboration, not only do you get the brightest minds making this their top priority, but also you get lots of money. It's not that money makes research happen faster, but rather the lack of money will prevent research from getting done. The fact that they didn't have any shortage of funding really helped prevent this vaccine development from being hindered due to cost. Next, a lot of times it's very difficult to recruit people to participate in vaccine trials simply because it's risky, it's scary, and people don't want to risk their lives. But in this case, because so many people were affected by the pandemic, we had no shortage of people who wanted to help. Lastly, scientists could run some trials simultaneously rather than sequentially, as we showed in a previous slide, and that also saved a great deal of time. The next myth that we have is that the COVID vaccines alter your DNA. And the reality is that they don't, and here's why. This is a simplified diagram of our human cell, and you'll recognize inside you have an organelle called the mitochondria, which is the powerhouse of the cell, right? So the mitochondria is an example of an organelle, and there are other organelles that exist inside of your human cell. But one of the parts of the cell is called the nucleus, and inside the nucleus, that's where your DNA hangs out. But when you get the messenger RNA vaccine, it gets carried across the membrane and it goes into the cytoplasm, which is this watery, salty, grayish purple matrix out here. It gets translated from messenger RNA into proteins in the ribosomes of the endoplasmic reticulum. The messenger RNA never goes inside of the nucleus. And even if it did, the messenger RNA itself is just genetic material. It doesn't have any machinery of its own. Messenger RNA, if it's inside of the nucleus, gets shipped out of the nucleus to go and get translated into proteins. So there's no way that the messenger RNA is going to mess with your DNA. The next myth that we have is that the COVID-19 vaccine is just a way to microchip people. The reality is that there's no microchip in the vaccine. We know what the ingredients are. And the reason why we know what the ingredients are is because one of the conditions to get emergency use authorization from the Food and Drug Administration is that you have to provide a list of all of the ingredients that goes into your drugs. And that is publicly available. So we can go and look up the paper and see all of the ingredients that are in the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. Anything that gets emergency use authorization, you can look up the ingredients yourself. So we already know what the messenger RNA does. It's the blueprint just for the spike protein. We know that the lipids transport the messenger RNA across the cell membranes. We know that the pH buffers and salts make it a stable solution for the lipids, not too acidic, not too basic, and the salts make it more comfortable to administer. And we know that it has sugar in it, which stabilizes it for freezing and thawing. None of these are to make a microchip. The last myth is that the COVID vaccines make your body make the virus. Here's why that's impossible. The messenger RNA is the blueprint to make just one piece of the virus, the spike. It doesn't code for any other components of the coronavirus. So we're going to use an analogy. So think of the coronavirus as this whole car. And think of the spike protein as just this little piece, this little side mirror, just that part of the car. The messenger RNA in the vaccine is a blueprint just to make this mirror, just to make the spike, just to make this piece of it. So no matter how many copies you make of that mirror or of the spike, even if you put all of them together, you still don't have a car and you still don't have a virus. So your body is not going to be making the virus. It's just going to be making one single piece of the virus. Now we're going to talk about how to sort through misinformation on the internet and out in conversations. When you are considering a news article or a meme or a story on TV, you always want to check and see if the headline is alarmist or sensational, or if it looks like it's attacking a specific group, whether it's a political group or a religious group or anything else. Usually, reputable sources don't really rely on scare tactics. They don't try to make anyone angry, and they don't make an effort to attack a particular group. It doesn't mean that that particular article isn't reputable. It's just that it's pushing one narrative of a story instead of the full story objectively. You want to utilize objective fact-checking websites such as Snopes. And if you don't like Snopes, you can Google objective fact-checking website and choose another one. You're always going to want to consider the source. So check for a media bias by searching for that news channel or journal, followed by bias. Lastly, always check to see if the article is citing peer-reviewed scientific journals. And then the journal itself, you want to make sure that it doesn't have too much of a bias. So you can search for the name of the journal, followed with reliability or bias. A lot of times people are not going to do all of these steps because it's a lot of steps. And they're especially not going to follow those steps if they read something that already aligns with a bias that they already have. We call this a confirmation bias. Because of that, people in general are far more likely to click share on their social media rather than taking all of these steps to check to see if the source is reputable. And for that reason, because people have this propensity to just click share whenever they see something that confirms their bias, you always want to be extremely wary of any articles that are shared on social media. I would like to thank all of the essential workers, all of the first responders, and the medical personnel who are risking their health and their safety to provide essential services and fight the spread of COVID. I want to thank all of the scientists and the volunteers who aided in the research and development of the vaccines. I want to thank the content creators, i.e. PBS, and thank you to all of you for watching this brief and paying attention. I feel that the best way that we can fight misinformation is to arm ourselves with the facts, and that was the goal of this brief, is to provide that information so that people can make those logic-based decisions rather than fear-based decisions. Thank you, and see you around.